There's always a concern that a mistake, a misunderstanding, or an accident could trigger Armageddon. It's a worrying uplift in the amount of attacks that Russia is doing deep into Ukraine. Europe has woken up, Poles have woken up. The Poles are very worried that it could spill into Poland. We understand sort of 400 drones and missiles have been fired by the Russians into Ukraine. Of significance, I think, over last night is there were a lot of attacks in the west of Ukraine. In other words, close to the Polish border and much deeper into Ukraine. I'm sure the jets were scrambled because there was a concern that some of these drones might leak over the border into Poland. In the last week, there's been a real uptick in Russian attacks into Ukraine, mainly on civilian targets, although the Russians do say they are striking military targets in retaliation for Spider's Web, and also the attack on the Bryansk military airport last week, which destroyed a lot of Russian aircraft.
We think, and we have our analytics, that we destroyed 34% of their strategic air jets. We have to prepare such plans, and we are not stopping. We have to prepare such plans because Russia can't, because we don't really know if they will stop this war. They don't want. They don't want to stop the war. This is the problem.
It is no secret that virtually all of the Western support for Ukraine comes through Poland. Ammunition and capability is coming through Western Ukraine from Poland. So attacking hubs where perhaps equipment's been supported. Also potentially training areas. We know that Ukraine is trying to do a lot of training so that its troops can more effectively work in what we call combined arms maneuver, combining drones, artillery, tanks and fighters. And they have been doing their training as far away from Russia as possible, which makes a lot of sense. And as such, one could see that maybe if Russia extends its operation to attack the communication lines and deep into Ukraine, then that they could attack into Poland. I might say that I think that would be more by accident than design, because of course any attack into Poland would trigger Article 5, and one sort of gets the feeling sort of the Poles, maybe the Baltic states as well, are perhaps itching to have an excuse to give some Russian assets a bit of a thumping. I think Poland is really the hard shoulder of Europe. They do genuinely really see the threat from Russia. You've got a very big sea border with the Baltic Sea, which is really a contested space. We've seen a lot of Russian naval maritime activity there, not least cables under the sea, potential pipelines as well. So it's an area of vulnerability. And they've got a very large border with Belarus. He's a sort of proxy Russian state anyway. So they are a key element to Europe. I think the other NATO countries realise that, and no doubt there'll be lots of contingency plans to support and bolster Poland. It's all about deterrence. Putin must understand that he cannot achieve his aims. And let's not forget, his ultimate aim is to redraw the borders of the old Soviet Union, which includes the Latvian states, as the Poles so clearly know, includes them, places like Romania and Bulgaria. So it's what we learned from 1913, 1914, and hopefully what we learned from 1939 is actually you have got to make it absolutely certain that somebody like Hitler and now Putin knows that they cannot succeed, which was not the case, certainly in 1939. So that should hopefully reassure people, but it should also get people to understand why we need to spend 3.5% of our GDP on defence, because quite frankly, if our deterrence doesn't work, then we will be at war. We'll be back in a sort of Second World War type scenario, which nobody wants.